didn't vote for Trump in the primary. I was a DeSantis person and she was a Haley person. We could have gone either way. They were both tremendous. She was hoping that Haley would be the vice president.
I really had wished he could figure out somehow how to amend those states and have her as his vice president. Yeah.
I think he would. See, I disagree. Originally, I would have thought that, but I don't.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's hard to put my finger on. I felt when, I don't know.
No, I guess.
So in
I don't know why.
the assassination attempt, there was a woman right behind the stage there. She had a shirt on that said mean tweets. 2025 went on, I forgot her.
Oh my
She
God.
came in here yesterday. Mean tweets 2024.
It's subtle.
I've had a MAGA hat on for years.
More hesitant about, being public with stuff like that.
But that's a problem, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
And I had a brown shirt with the
I hope you enjoyed your lunch. So let me introduce my next speaker. I've gotten to know over the years, and I'll ask him what's going on in his beautiful state where people seem to have lost their mind. For years, we've always joked about Florida man, and it's only a matter of time before we start joking about Arizona man. But the former governor of Arizona, now with Citizens for Free Enterprise, you'll notice one of my themes here this year, completely intentionally, is to defend the free market, because there are so many people on our side now who are new to our side, who aren't sure they believe in a free market. But also, we got this wild world of politics, and just as Georgia is one of the big swing states, the state where he used to be the governor, also one of the big swing states, and he happened to be an extremely fantastic governor who, as a Georgian who loves my state being an economic engine, I'm kind of really glad he's not there, because the new governor is not as job and business friendly as he was when he was there. But we'll talk about all of that on stage with the former governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey. All right, so I've got to just start with, the raw political question before we get into everything else. Arizona and the Republican Party, as an outsider looking in, it just seems like we always joke Republicans like to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and it just seems like you guys in Arizona really want to do that sometimes.
Well, I think first I want to say thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of yours, Eric. I think you are a voice of reason on the right. I think we've had a void since Rush has left us, and I want to thank you for standing in the cold. I also think I can really legitimately make the case that Arizona is still a center-right state, and I'd offer a couple statistics. I won the governorship in 2014 by 12 points, and the wind was at our back as Republicans. I won re-election in 2018 by 14 points, a larger margin, and I won 44% of the Hispanic vote against an opponent named David Garcia.
He was French, right?
Well, it just shows when we don't play identity politics, and we shouldn't, because we wouldn't be very good at it. But when we get in those rooms and make the case for our ideas, we win, and we can win by bigger margins. But candidates matter, campaigns matter, and I think if we would have had the proper nominee for governor in 2022, we would have won by 8 or 10 points. But we are where we are right now, and there are some platelets that are shifting, and I think some things are resetting. It's part of the reason why I set up Citizens for Free Enterprise. We want to educate and advocate for free enterprise, but we also want to activate voters on timeless, evergreen principles that really differentiate our country. So we're on the ground in Arizona, we're on the ground in Georgia right now. I'm good friends with Brian Kemp, and I believe we can deliver these states and bring new people into the system, but we are in a spot right now in Arizona, and we're gonna have to navigate out of it.
Okay, so before I go on, and this is a complete tangent off everything, hitting my 40s, I needed to develop a good hobby in golf in Arizona and golf courses. How does one play golf in Scottsdale in the summer without dying?
You got to go out early. If you tee off, if you're first off the tee box, you can be done by 11 and you're at the pool by noon. But summer's going to be here any day in Arizona.
Okay, now Citizens for Free Enterprise. It's been a theme of mine, and I feel like I keep beating my head with people that write who feel that they have a misunderstanding of what free enterprise is, I guess, to a degree, that, by free enterprise, we're allowing these corporations to push woke values. We have to fight back, which means we must become against free enterprise, which I don't think that's the case at all. And it seems to me that it's not a matter of like communists say, well, we've never really tried communism. We actually have tried the free market in this country, and it worked quite well. But now we've gotten to a point where both sides seem to want to have the power to pick the winners and losers, which only does perpetuate corporations carrying out a political agenda.
We don't beat Democrats by becoming them. And I have spoken out against this big government republicanism that I see creeping in on the right, because I think we're only sharpening the knife that the left will eventually use on us. There's a lot of freedoms that are worth fighting for in this country, and they've been articulated by your previous guests very well. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. But it really has been this freedom to pursue the American dream, to seek opportunity that has helped differentiate our country. I mean, part of the reason we are so consequential around the world is because our economy has been so innovative, and we have created such wealth that it's funded the greatest military force in the history of the world, and it's allowed us to overcome a lot of the stupid spending decisions that have happened in Washington, D.C. And if we're to lose that, then so much of our might dries up, and we need to be the spokespeople and the defenders and the advocates of free enterprise and proper free enterprise principles. The other thing I want to say is, I think you can see by the net inflow into Georgia, I'm very proud that Arizona is among the fastest growing states in the country. Americans vote with their feet. Voters are smart, and so are consumers. Look what they've done and how they've punished some of these corporations that have made really poor woke decisions.
You say that about Arizona and Georgia. The thing we both have in common, although probably we still have it worse than you guys, is the traffic because of all these people coming in. Californians do not know how to drive.
You should see when it rarely rains in Arizona, then it's real trouble with the California.
Like snow here, yes. Okay, I want to go back to identity politics because one of the terms that infuriates me, and I understand why people use it, is either a Hispanic voter or a Latino voter, except these are people from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and we're treating all of these people from different life stories in different countries as if they're just this one homogenous group. And that's what the left does, as opposed to, on our side, it seems like we used to say, you're from Guatemala, but you want to be an American, welcome.
I think for me, one of the eye-opening stories, there were several, but there's a very successful individual in Arizona named Ernie Garcia. He's the Carvana individual. And he was a bundler for Barack Obama and a committed Democrat. He left the Democratic Party. He wasn't a big fan of mine when I first started running for office. And then he saw how I came into some of these rooms and spoke to people, and he decided to support me. And I said, Ernie, what was the conversion? And he said, you're talking to everybody as if they're Americans. And my thing is, if you're a citizen and you can vote, you're an American, not a hyphenated American, you're an American. And I really found out, and Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass universal ESAs, educational savings account. We were the first state to get it over the finish line. And that was most powerful in some of our more hostile rooms where there weren't a lot of Republicans, but there were people whose children were trapped in schools that weren't doing all that well. And they had the same value that they wanted to work hard climb the economic ladder, and wanted their children to learn something of value in school, and they were the ones that helped get those votes.
You know, you mentioned that I had this defining moment when I was first starting in radio, when Governor Nathan Deal here fought for charter schools in the state. And it was the NAACP and black church pastors who were opposed. And I started getting this massive number of black women calling my program. I'll never forget this one woman she called. She was crying the entire time she was on radio, explaining that she worked 2 jobs to keep her family together. Her mother came over in the morning to get the kids ready for school while she went to work. While the kids were at school, she came home, took a nap, went to another one. She wanted to help the kids with homework. With Common Core, she didn't understand how to teach them math. They told her she could come in. She just wanted a way to get her kids out of the school, and so she was supporting the charter school reform. And then you had Arizona and you had Florida, and you've seen these demographic shifts towards the right, largely because of the school choice issue. And I sometimes, like, Republicans, why aren't all of you embracing this issue?
Well, every Republican governor should be embracing this. This is the biggest issue at the state level. The most amount of spending in every state budget is in K-12 education. And in so many places, K-12 education is failing. It's been flatlining since 1982. It took me all of 8 years to get this done, and at some points I didn't think I would be able to get it done. Nobody had done it before. And it was actually during COVID and 2020. The leader of the Black Mothers Forum, a woman named Janelle Wood, somehow got into the governor's office during the George Floyd riots. I had called out the National Guard and put out an 8 p.m. curfew, and Janelle was unhappy with me. She said, "My students don't feel that they can have their voice heard, Governor, and they're angry." And I said, "Janelle, no reason for them to be angry. They can have their voices heard peacefully until 8 p.m. and then they can get a good night's sleep." She wasn't happy, but she said, "I wish there was something that we could agree on." And I said, "How do you feel about school choice?" And we began a conversation that led to her sitting next to Angela Ducey, the First Lady, in my final State of the State, when I said from the podium, 50 years ago, politicians stood in the schoolhouse door and wouldn't let minorities in. Today, politicians stand in the schoolhouse door and won't let minorities out. These kids are trapped in failing public schools, and it's time to set these families free. Janelle Wood, a Democrat, led the standing ovation. The African American pastors, not one of them a Republican, whipped the votes. We passed this by 1 vote in our House and 1 vote in our Senate. Now it's passed in 13 other states around the country. We're on the 1-yard line in Texas and the 1-yard line in Tennessee. This is the one reform that can truly renew our nation and reform K-12 education and put parents in charge of their children's education.
And it does seem to me we have all these people, like I was talking with Vice President Pence, that there's been this battle, I think, on the Republican and the Democratic side, is America an idea or is it just a country? When it's both, there's so many people who want to come to the country and be one of us, but they want to come because of the story and the idea. And it just seems like we have so many people here in the country, largely non-white, who are shut out of the story because their kids are shut into the public school.
I'm a conservative. I'm just not angry about it. My friend Bill Lee in Tennessee says that, and I tell him I use it sometimes with attribution, sometimes without. But I do think when you look at, you had Ron DeSantis here earlier, you had Brian Kemp. These are excellent governors, but if you take a close look, it's a winning playbook. And it's a playbook you can walk into any room in your state and make the case on this. And like I said, the number one investment line or spending line, depending how you look at it, is in K-12 education. And a lot of folks start out hostile to some of these ideas. But sometimes I think we forget as elected leaders We think we have some power, and of course you do as governor, but your real power is the platform in which you're standing on. And I think we shouldn't forget that we are, when we're at our best, in the persuasion business. We do have the better ideas. The country is divided, it's divided politically, but I get a focus group once or twice a week, which is sitting coach on Southwest Airlines or American Airlines. And undoubtedly somebody will say, what do you do, or where are you from? And it's a 50% chance I'm going to be sitting next to someone who votes differently than I do. But through the course of that conversation and talking about some of the things that we were able to do in Arizona, or what you see happening in some of these other Republican states, the country is not divided on supporting our police force. They are not divided on proper spending around infrastructure, or divided on giving parents a choice so their kids can get a better education. And when we make those ideas properly, we win. Our ideas properly presented are winners. And it's not a 51-49 winner, it's an 80-20, it's a 90-10. And if we could find our way back to that, I think we'd be winning a lot more elections and making a lot more headway for the hearts and minds of the American people.
So let me talk to you about Citizens for Free Enterprise, because a lot of people, when they leave office, they go join some think tank, and you decided to impose the burden on yourself of starting a group. Why start a group as opposed to what's out there? What niche do you see that you feel called to really fill?
So I was really blessed as a governor. I had a great campaign team. I came from the private sector. Cold Stone Creamery was my company. It was started in Arizona, and I'll tell you, it's a great primer. You open up 1,440 ice cream stores in all 50 states. You get a real idea on what the economic policy is in that state.
I've got to stop you there, because now I got a bone to pick with you. Do you know how much money my son makes me spend every week because of you now?
God
We
bless
just
you.
got one down the street from us.
It's
terrible.
it's good for you.
My wife, who's on this diet kick and pulls UPS trucks for fun, discovered the peanut butter ice cream blend at Cold Stone. You are a problem for my family.
We'll have this conversation after we're done. There might be some free ice cream in it for you. So the point I wanted to bring up is I was blessed with a very good campaign team and then a great policy team. It was when I became the chairman of the Republican Governors Association, and we had 38 governors races over the last 2 years, and I was able to see what was going on around the country. And thank goodness we have great governors like Brian Kemp, who had an incredible record and an excellent team. And also thank goodness that Stacey Abrams was not a very good gubernatorial candidate.
I wish she was a great president.
I love that line. But one thing I think we have to give Stacey Abrams her due on is she registered 800,000 new voters in the state of Georgia, a state that President Trump lost by 11,000. We today have 2 Democratic senators in the state of Georgia and 2 Democratic senators in the state of Arizona. And what I really noticed on the right is there was no one really doing the hard work of actually registering new voters, of getting into those hostile rooms. And you can probably tell I like going into hostile rooms and making the case for things I believe in. It should scare all of us to death if you went into a high school or a college classroom today with a placard that said socialism and capitalism. It's about a 50-50 proposition. So if we don't get back to making the case and then asking those young people to identify with certain principles that can influence their future career and pursuit of happiness, we're going to be really behind the 8 ball. And I think this idea, we want to work with state parties, but state parties are supposed to be in the business of registering voters, raising resources, and winning races. We want to bring those assets and data and knowledge to that, and when we have a party chairman that wants to be our partner, we'll be arm in arm. There's no turf war there, but if there's somebody that wants to work against a sitting Republican candidate, like we've experienced in some of these other states, we're going to be there to protect and defend.
So I get to nerd out with you here on this point, because in a former life, I ran campaigns, and I love the ground game. And I don't think people understand. In fact, I had a lady call yesterday. Her name was Gretchen. I know because that's my sister's name. She's like, does knocking on doors really do anything? I was like, there's overwhelming data to show that the more you knock on someone's door and connect with them as a neighbor, the more likely they are to turn out and vote for your candidate. And it does seem like, as a state, and it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican, as that state becomes monopolistic towards one party, that party's ground game begins to collapse, and over time, it gives way for the other party to start knocking on the doors, which to some degree I think we saw here in Georgia, where the Republican Party began to rest on its laurels, and Stacey Abrams saw that and won. And how important it is to actually connect with your neighbor physically, not just on Facebook, but actually show up at their house, where people don't want to be bothered anymore, and yet it actually works.
Campaigns matter. They make a huge difference, and we could talk about all kinds of examples where somebody had a better campaign. I also think that the candidate matters, but this ground game is a real difference maker, and Arizona, in a way, enjoyed an embarrassment of riches as a red state. It wasn't that long ago that we weren't being contested in a presidential election, and I think a mindset crept in on the right that if I win the primary, I win. And that was true for some time. Well, it's not true today, and I think Arizona is very reflective of the country in many ways. We're 34% R, we're 33% D, and then the biggest party in the state, or equal to the Republican Party, are independents or non-affiliated. So once you win the Republican nomination, the Republicans are with you. They are going to vote for you. It's getting into those larger rooms where people are undecided or don't think about politics the way we do or with the same amount of intensity. And that's why I talk about this thought of presenting our ideas and persuading people, because when you make the case, there may not be that applause at the end of every line in these independent rooms, but people leave discerning that this is someone with an agenda, and it's action-oriented. And this will affect my life and my children's lives in a better way. Another thing that I think we fall into is we think because Californians are moving to a state that it's going to immediately corrupt it. Let's remember that Ronald Reagan was a Californian, and he would likely be leaving California at this time as well. And the only state that's had more Californians move to it than Arizona is Texas. So people leave California for a reason. I mean, Reagan said had the Pilgrims landed on the West Coast, they would have never bothered to discover the rest of the country. That's what California used to be. But decades of failed leadership and failed policy have people fleeing the Golden State. And it's benefiting many of these red states. But we do need to remind them why they left and why these ideas are in their best interest before we ask them to change party registration.
It was interesting you said that. I remember the exit polling from 2022 that new Texas voters who had moved into the state tended to be far more conservative than the people who were lifelong Texans in the urban and suburban areas. That stat just continues to stand out. Now let me give you a quote. You can steal this one too. This is from James Carville, and I've always thought it was one of the best political quotes. The goal is not to win the primary. The goal is to win the election. And I do think more and more we see Democrats and Republicans both make mistakes by trying so hard to win the primary. They put themselves out there in such a way it actually makes it harder to convince independent voters to win the election in the general.
That's why I say that the candidate matters, because there is some discipline that's necessary in the campaign, and we should have raucous primaries. I mean, they should be competitive. The more the merrier. The water's warm. I think there were 14 candidates in my primary in 2014, and some of them were saying some outrageous things where they would maybe be tagged as the most conservative individual in the race. But my mindset was I wanted to be the most electable conservative in that race. And I didn't think there was any victory in winning a primary and being disqualified for a general. So that's why I say you have to know what you believe, and you have to be able to communicate it both in 30-second debate answers and also long-form interviews. And then you have to get out and make the case, like Margaret Thatcher used to say before James Carville, win the argument, then win the vote.
I want to go back to something you said earlier where we risk as conservatives if we forget what works, sharpening the knives the left uses to get us with. When I bring this up on radio and even with people here in the room perhaps, and the argument, the pushback I get so often is that we never actually do the things to prevent the knives from being sharpened, and so we might as well sharpen the knives and use them ourselves. And there is this, I think, creeping belief for a lot on the right that we're unilaterally disarming in ways that won't disarm the left. My argument has always been we've got to disarm the left, and we do that by getting rid of the power altogether. Throw the ring back in the volcano. How do you talk to people about that?
Well, I really try to make the case around the power that the consumer has, and there's examples that you can point out. The way that you really hurt these companies is to choose another product and to go elsewhere. And I do think we've been given a gift. I always think the other side is they've been at work for decades. And they have climbed into the wormwood of academia and a lot of these boardrooms. And we see it under different guises of ESG or DEI or CRT. But once we've gotten our arms around that, we've made a real headway in having the pendulum swing back to the right. And I think that's the only way we can do it, because if, God forbid, we were to have some success on these ideas from a big government perspective and then they take power, think of what they could do with the powers that they saw under COVID. I don't know that there were many silver linings during COVID-19, but I do think there were two. One was school choice. We would have never gotten ESAs done in Arizona until parents saw what their kids were being taught or not taught over those little screens. They saw the indoctrination, and something that didn't pass in 2017 passed by a large margin, and they couldn't even get the signatures to recall it. The other silver lining of COVID is I think people really saw the difference between conservative leadership and Democratic leadership. I mean, these Democratic governors were closet authoritarians, locking down their states, mandating masks, demanding everyone get a vaccine. And it really was, if it wasn't for the red states, America would not have been open. But our red states were open. Our kids are doing better in those places. The economies are thriving, and Americans are moving to those places. And now I think people better understand the differences between the two parties.
Okay, as we're winding down here, I want to go back to Arizona. My family, we vacationed in Sedona several years ago. We've been trying to get back. That is a beautiful area. But also, the amount of crystal shops and like flaky people and so on was very, very interesting. If someone wants, what do you recommend if people go to Arizona? Like I've been to Biltmore, I've been to Phoenix, I'm on the radio in Phoenix and Tucson. What do you recommend people see when they go to Arizona?
Well, if you could come out for spring training, we've got 16 of the Major League Baseball teams that are out there for March and April. It's the most beautiful time of the year.
Rod DeSantis is around. Note they don't all go to Florida these days.
And you're in Greater Phoenix and Scottsdale the entire time with these great spring training ballparks. And then I know you love golf here in Georgia, and you have the greatest tournament in the history of the world. We have a great tournament as well called the Phoenix Open. It's a little different than the Masters, and it's always the week leading up to the Super Bowl. Those are two incredible events. And then if you want to get outside of Phoenix, you know that Sedona is beautiful, but it also does have some of those idiosyncrasies of being around the vortex. And then Flagstaff, Arizona, in Coconino County and the White Mountains, you know, it snows there in the winter. It's got the most beautiful summer when it's hot in Phoenix, and that's actually where you want to go to play golf.
You know, you say that my daughter took a field trip to the Grand Canyon and they went through Flagstaff, and it was like late March or April, and it was just snowing everywhere in Flagstaff. So beautiful area, and I love to light telescopes and look at stars at night, talk about a dark city.
Beautiful open sky.
It's fantastic. So what's next for you? You're focused on Citizens Free Enterprise now. Does something come next for you? Do you have something on the horizon?
Well, I still I loved being governor. Of course, I loved leading Cold Stone Creamery as well. This has been a great transition for me to be a part of something with a purpose that keeps a foot in our cause that I think can make a difference as we navigate through where we are right now. I think I have an act or two left in me, but we'll let the future roll out and we'll see.
Well, listen, I can't thank you guys enough. One, for your help in putting this together with Citizens for Your Prayers, and two, just sitting here on stage and hanging out with me.
Thank you. It's a great crowd. Gives me a real jolt of positive energy. Thank you.
Thank you for all your work. When my son finds out what he used to do for me. No, so we just got a Cold Stone Creamery, and it's down the street from our house. And every week, I used to think having a Chick-fil-A across the street was bad. Now it's like Chick-fil-A and Cold Stone Creamery. I might as well like throw my money out the window as we go down. The kid loves ice cream. I make homemade ice cream, and he's like, "Can we just go to Cold Stone?" So, okay, now, my next guest, I've never met, and I've always wanted to meet. And the reason why is because I told you my story earlier. When I started at Red State, I got this book from Mike Pence. It's Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind, Be Sure What You Believe, You're going to be a voice for the conservative movement. At the time, the Republican Study Committee was it in Washington, D.C. as a voice for conservatives inside Congress. And over the years, through ups and downs, the Republican Study Committee, it kind of faded, and it's just made this ideological, intellectual resurgence on Capitol Hill as a place for conservatives to go to find a way, not just to say no to everything in Washington, but what can we do to advance a conservative agenda, to get it through a leadership that's sometimes hostile to conservative ideas, but also build bridges so that we can actually advance conservative freedom. And the guy who really has led this intellectual revitalization of the Republican Study Committee happens to be a congressman from Oklahoma who I've never met and I've been wanting to meet, and I actually invited him here so I could actually meet him for the first time. It's Congressman Kevin Hern. Okay, so first, I'm going to play tourist with you because I have never been to Oklahoma. I'm now on the radio in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And if I go to Oklahoma, I know I've got to go see the Pioneer Woman, who my wife dearly loves, but what do you see in Oklahoma?
Well, first of all, I love the state, and thanks for having me. You have our great governor, Kevin Stitt, on later today, and so you're going to learn a lot more about Oklahoma. I grew up in Arkansas, and spent 35 years in the McDonald's franchising world, and got an opportunity in 1999 to move to Oklahoma to purchase 2 restaurants in Muskogee, Oklahoma, the famous town that everyone's heard from Merle Haggard. And God placed me right next to then Congressman Tom Coburn's mother-in-law. Very conservative individual. I didn't care about politics, and so I started working with him as he was leaving, and when he ran for Senate, I ran for him, and I learned a lot about Oklahoma from him and the politics of Oklahoma, because much of the South, much like Georgia and Arkansas and elsewhere across the South, started changing from the old guard of Democrat to Republican. And I don't think they changed as much as the Democrat Party left them. And I loved Oklahoma. That side of the state looks just like Arkansas, where I grew up in the Ozark Mountains on the Arkansas River, and ended up spending the next 25 years there, going on 26. Built 24 McDonald's restaurant organization, plus some banking and real estate development, manufacturing companies, and so employed a lot of people, met a lot of great people in Oklahoma, and just loved the environment.
I want you to know I'm struggling with all of my willpower to not ask you about the ice cream machines.
For the record, mine always work. Now, I don't own any anymore. That's like my last 3 years ago.
So let me talk to you about the Republican Study Committee, because as I was saying, literally the reason I was so excited to have you here is for years, when I was running Red State, I had this great collaborative relationship with the Republican Study Committee, and I know that there were the problems in the House Freedom Caucus, and I've got a lot of dear friends of mine who are in the House Freedom Caucus, but the Republican Study Committee always seemed to be like, the ideas of the conservative movement that are translated into legislation come from the RSC. And how do you, as a congressman who is unquestionably conservative in your voting record, balance the desire to oftentimes just say no to everything with, we got to do something, how can we make it conservative?
Yeah, there's so much in that question I think is so important for the conservative movement because you need to be conservative whether you're in the majority or the minority of the House. And the RSC, the Republican Study Committee, is that constant for the Republican Party. It's the largest caucus now it's ever been. It's 180 members of the Republican Party. You had Speaker Mike Johnson on this morning, former chair. You had Vice President Pence on, former chair. Jim Jordan, former chair. Steve Scalise, the majority leader, former chair. So you can see the pattern here. People go on to lead great things after RSC. And that's important because you learn the foundation. You have a very smart staff. That you learn everything. I don't know where in Congress, honestly, that any member, including the Speaker of the House, can get the kind of knowledge you get as the leader of the Republican Study Committee because we touch every aspect of government, from foreign policy to border policy, economic policy, energy policy, and you get that at your disposal. And they're really smart young people. And so that's important because what I have tried to do with the Republican Study Committee is to not make it political. I know that sounds goofy being in Washington, D.C., but we want the policy to permeate the Republican Party. So we drive a stake out in front of leadership, and certainly Speaker Johnson, and the number 2 leader in the House, Steve Scalise, the majority leader, both being former RSU chairs, understand that and need that guidance, need to understand where the conference is. And so I love taking on that role. The interesting thing about the Republican Study Committee chairmanship is it's only one term. There are no mulligans, there's no do-overs, so you hit the ground running, you work as long as you want to work. And a restaurant guy, that's like all the time. And so I want to leave it better than I found it. And I think we're doing a great job, not just for me, but outside groups saying the same thing. And we want to make sure we have a very conservative conscience of the conference before we leave.
So I get the pleasure of talking to a congressman who's not a lawyer, but actually a business owner and restaurateur. So let's talk about entrepreneurialism and conservatism, because it does seem like we've had several conversations, Patrick Hedger, for example, from Taxpayer Protection Alliance, talking about how big the Code of Federal Regulations has gotten. With just a measuring stick, you can measure the growth of regulation. As someone who's owned McDonald's franchises, can you just talk from your experience as a business owner, how those regulations harm your business?
It's the very reason I ran for Congress. I'd never ran for anything before I ran for Congress in 2018. I was the lone business person in the race among lawyers and other attorneys and the like in the 1st District of Oklahoma. But I ran under the guise that I wanted to get government out of the way so businesses could create jobs and put Americans to work. It was that simple. That's what I do every single day that I've been in Congress. I sleep very well. The policies that I worked on, the policies that I pushed, all lead back to the same road. Is I believe, as Ronald Reagan once said, the best social program in America is a job. As a guy who grew up extraordinarily poor in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas with no running water, no indoor plumbing until the 8th grade, the oldest of 5 kids, and a stepdad that loved to live on welfare, I can tell you right now the government is not the answer. The government's a place to get a hand up, but the consistent handouts only make people frustrated with the government because those who peel off and go take the root of the American dream, the one that says when you get knocked down, you get back up and you do it time and time again, and ultimately your American dream will be achieved. It won't be the same as yours or somebody else's. There are no guarantees of that. I want to guarantee the opportunity that people in America have the same opportunity that I had.
It's great to hear you say that, because it does seem like Democrats now, instead of wanting people to have an equal opportunity to have an equal outcome, which seems to be driving so many of the public policy decisions that the Democrats are trying to impose on the country.
My story that I just shared with you, there are many others in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. The frustrating thing for me is that the Democrats who are pushing for the social programs to be enriched or guaranteed know that it's not the answer for those people to become successful and get back on their feet. They're looking at it purely as a leaning on the government, as a buying the vote. And that's very frustrating because I can tell you, having siblings that were initially, because they're younger than I, frustrated with me, they thought I got a silver spoon, although we grew up in the same household, learned later that the path forward was to get a job, get a better job, and get a career, something I call the ABCs of life: a job, better job, career. And I spent 35 years at McDonald's, taking people that didn't know how to work, teaching them how to work. Many went on to be store managers making $60,000, $70,000 a year, some with 10th grade education. some going on to be director of operations, others going on to own their own restaurants and do other things. But kids have not changed in my 35 years of hiring them. Everybody wants to start out as a CEO. It's about who the person is that's hiring them that gives them this education and understands that, you know, a job is something that's so important for your personal integrity, your desire to want to be accountable and responsible to yourself and to your family. And when I looked at people, especially as a small business owner, I knew that I was going to be the last to get paid, my family and I, and sometimes we didn't get paid at all. And so, because everybody else had to support their family, and that's the mark of a true small business person, is you know you're the last to get paid. Everybody else gets paid first. And when you can say you've been through that, then I have a lot of respect for you as a small business person.
So let me ask you a question about the minimum wage then, as it affected you in your business. It has always struck me that the minimum wage is a starting wage where you get teenagers and young people into the workforce. And under the Biden economy right now, you've got more and more people who are dependent on a minimum wage who can't elevate themselves in society. And so now the solution on the left is just to jack up the minimum wage, which then deprives more young people of work. It becomes this sick cycle. I mean, how would you approach not just the minimum wage, but this level of reform to get more young people to the workforce without having to rely on keeping people on minimum wage?
I think looking at a minimum wage from the federal level, I think that's part our founders warned us about, is the federal government being so big that it would be, quote, the savior of everything in the United States. 13 colonies then, now 50 states and territories, you know, that we're responsible for. But I think when you look at this, every state is designed as a laboratory of an experiment, a competition, a business, if you will. You heard Governor Ducey saying, you know, he started out with, you know, the parent choice or school choice. I think it's parent choice, being able to choose where your child goes. And that's, you know, gone throughout the red states across America, including our great state of Oklahoma. But when you look at that, I think that our states are where the minimum wage ought to be addressed. And, you know, President Biden talked a lot about minimum wage. You know, he had a 4-year vacation between the vice presidency and the presidency, and Pennsylvania and Delaware are still a federal minimum wage states. He could have been out, you know, being an activist for that if that was such a big deal for him. He knows, as well as everybody knows, the states are competing against other states for labor, and a business is only as good as its people. And if that's the issue that's keeping people from your state, that will be put on the ballot and be voted on.
Let me talk to you about Congress a little bit, because I've got friends of mine who are in Congress who they've been obviously very frustrated with the past year. We have a very narrow majority and different competing interests that sometimes members of the Republicans in the House might trip over their own feet. How do you try to balance being a conservative but also working with leadership in a way that might advance agendas that maybe doesn't exactly go the way you want to go, but you feel like you've got to lend your vote to get something done?
Well, I don't often compromise my morals. I think you learn things. I think if you go with your eyes wide open, you don't know everything. It's Congress. Once you get into Congress, there are really no books written about how complex federal government really is. There are a lot of people who will say that they're steadfast, but what you realize at the end of the day, it's much easier to vote no and go back home and tell everybody you vote no. But you can't legislate that way. But there are some principles you have to put in place. I am a staunch conservative when it comes to being, fiscally responsible and fiscally accountable to the taxpayer dollars. One of the things, if not the most important thing the Republican Study Committee is known for, is putting out balanced budgets. Just for everybody's understanding, why our runaway spending is such a problem. I've never voted on a budget since I've been in Congress. There's never been one put on the floor. The only budgets that have been done are from the Republican Study Committee. I chaired that subcommittee on the RSC for 4 years ago. And just to give you the complexity of the budget, $13 trillion to balance in 10 years, 4 years ago. The next year, about $14.4 trillion of cuts over 10 years to balance. That means for 10 years, having what we would consider to be austere measures to get to a neutral deficit. Last year, as the chairman of the RSC, that subcommittee being underneath my chairmanship, Ben Klein from Virginia chaired that subcommittee, but I also sit on that. It was about $16 trillion. This year, $17.7 trillion. So the trend is not getting easier. So for everybody that thinks that it's going to be easier next year than this year, it is not so. And for all of you in your household, for your businesses that are county government, city government, state government, everybody that I just mentioned has to have a budget. And for the most part, they have to balance. Or at some point in time in the future, they have to balance. When you look at that, a budget is more, as I've shared with leadership just recently, a budget is more than just a financial gathering of data or putting numbers on the balance sheet. It is where you focus. If you put together a budget and you pass a budget, which is, by the way, the 1974 Budget Control Act said Congress has to do, we're violating federal law as members of Congress by not putting a budget for it, both sides. If we do a budget, it focuses all the 22 authorizing committees and the 12 appropriation committees on getting a job done, meeting and putting things together. And the way typically you do a budget in your business is you take numbers, you put numbers together and you get to a bottom line and says, okay, I can live with that. Then you go back and you work on policies for each of those line items in business, state government. In the federal government, we take the policies that are put forward, the legislation that's passed, some 300 pieces in this last Republican Study Committee budget, and we look at the scoring of those particular pieces of legislation, like securing the southern border, like in having a robust energy policy, like getting spending under control by stopping giving away programs. And you score all those and you put them into a budget, and then you see how much you need to cut to get back to a zero or a neutral deficit. It's a very complex, it's the largest budget in the world. And so we have to do that. We have to get muscle memory back so we can do it repetitively year after year.
I'm trying to phrase this because I don't want it to come across as impolite but we do have this bipartisan problem where Republicans, when we have Republican control of the White House, have also been negligent in trying to prepare budgets. It just seems to be easier to pass the continuing resolution. So how do you get out of that cycle? Can we get out of that cycle?
I think part of the problem is that, we need, on Americans, this just sounds really bad, that we ought to agree on something, that your taxpayer dollars are the most important thing. They're not an endless supply. I get asked this question everywhere I go in crowds this size, from 10 to 10,000. And I will tell you the reason that we don't have balanced budgets in America today is because of we as voters, as individual voters. I assure you that the most important thing in Congress, for any member of Congress, House or Senate, is to get reelected. And if the people rose up and said the most important thing to us this cycle is that we want a balanced budget and we want to start paying down our debt, I assure you that every member of Congress, Republican and Democrat, would break their backs trying to make that happen. But that's not the case. The case is everybody wants you to cut your spending on Eric or on Kevin. Don't cut my spending because mine is so important. And this is Republicans and Democrats. This is not a partisan issue. There's plenty to go around for everyone. And it's going to take us all to come together to fix it.
Well, and I remember that it was an op-ed not too long ago from former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels about it's going to take the crisis, it seems like at this point, to get everyone focused on it. And it does seem, in fact, that we're headed to this point now where debt is getting more than our GDP, and we're about to put ourselves in a terrible position. What's your sense? Is it going to take the crisis arriving for us to get to the point where we do this?
The problem with this, and listen, fear and failure motivates a lot of people to do a lot of things. The problem with that is today is that lurking right behind us is China, who wants us to fail. I'll borrow a line from A Few Good Men. They want us to fail. They need us to fail. Because if we fail by our own self-implosion, that's the best defeat ever. They never had to fire a single bullet. They didn't have to do a single cyber attack. We're eating ourselves alive by the debt because all this takes for us to crumble down is when we issue bonds, people quit buying because they're no longer secure in the good faith and credit of the United States government. These are real possibilities. The only people that are not talking about this being a real problem are the people that are elected. Everybody that's on the outside. You're going to have Matt Dickerson here later today talking about the debt. I know Matt very well, and he's very knowledgeable in this space. And what they're doing at Epic and elsewhere, Paul Winfrey and folks like that, they know this is an imminent threat to the American democracy as we know it. We have got to come together as a nation. So these are the important things the federal government is supposed to be doing, because at the end of the day, that's really the problem. The federal government is doing too much for the individuals. I mean, you had Governor Ducey here, you had Governor Stitt, you've got Governor Stitt coming later today. I assure you, in Governor Ducey's prior role, Governor Stitt's role today, the governors would love to have the ability to be more autonomous from the federal government. But when the federal government throws, chum in the water and says, okay, everybody get it, the red states know if they don't get their apportionment of that, then the blue states will take it all. And then all the blue states do is become more blue and more liberal, more socialist Democrats, if you will. So we got to stop the federal government from borrowing, taking taxpayer dollars to Washington, D.C., and turning around and continuing to divide the states. We have roughly 26-24 red to blues right now. And, I look at what, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is doing in my old state of Arkansas. I mean, she has gone in there and she has, time and time again, continue to make that place that people want to come do business. Governor Stitt is a business person. We're red all the way down to dog catching in Oklahoma. There's not it's Democrats show up because they look for cookies. There's no votes that they can do. I mean, they're basically tokens, and that's turned in 10 years. 10 years. And so, California was made up of Okies and Arkies in the 30s and 40s, and they've all come back. And so we need to make sure when they come back, they understand the reason they're coming back is because we are freer states. We're a place that you want to have individual liberties and understand the rule of law, and that we're not going to regulate you into non-existence. So it's really important that we have great states.
You mentioned China, and this takes me back to the Cold War era, where to a degree Ronald Reagan knew he could leverage the economy of the United States to upend the Soviet Union, and not just in an arms race, but drive them into bankruptcy. And it does seem we're doing this to ourselves with China, Russia, Iran, just looking on, watching us go off this fiscal cliff. And that it bothers me, and it bothers me more in that it seems like on the left in particular, the solution is always, well, raise corporate taxes, raise taxes on the wealthy, let's do a wealth tax, and do all of the things that would then never allow us to recover economically.
Well, I sit on Ways and Means also, and I'm chairing the subcommittee on international tax because that's all expiring next year. So I've spent all day yesterday in Atlanta talking to our great U.S. companies that are based here in the United States, Home Depots and others, and then last night talking with international companies based in the United States and how we're doing business abroad, more international businesses today. So I'm getting a great perspective of the impact of what China is doing behind the scenes that nobody knows about, under the guise that we're just here to help, I released a bill in combating communist China. It's all encompassing. It's all the things that you would want to know about what China is doing and how we should push back, including taking, Americans taking their capital and funding the technology growth in China. We're doing that every single day through different funds, either through BlackRock or others. Not just BlackRock, many funds out there that are going out and supporting the technology growth in China that they're turning around and using to compete against us, to try to control us economically and militarily. China is directly giving direct payment compensations to companies, especially in the technology world. We have great technology companies in the United States. It's known throughout the world, more so than Europe or China. China is offering a 200% immediate expensing on research and development to lure these companies to do the research and development there, because they know once they're there, they can steal the intellectual property. They'll have, Chinese educated, actually American Chinese educated individuals working on the IP in China, and it's very difficult to get it back. We are giving 20 cents on the dollar. We've got to fix that. There's a bill that we passed out of Ways and Means to the Senate. We've got to fix that. It's really important. We have to look at the global structure now. And we have a serious competitor in China, one that, to give you how close they are to us, we're at 25 trillion GDP. China's at 20 to 22 that we know of. The third place is Japan, it's 4.5 trillion. And we used to think, certainly in my day, that Japan was what was going to take over the world. We were afraid we need to learn how to speak Japanese. And now, because they've lost the curve of reproduction, they don't have the population, and it's declining very rapidly. And Germany's right there with them, about 4.4 trillion. So a huge chasm between second place, third place, and fourth place. And we've got a lot of work to do to make sure we shore up and protect the freedoms of this nation.
So I want to ask you this question that I occasionally will ask members of Congress is, it seems like there has been, and I don't know that it's still to the extent that it is, but there's been some philosophical thinking, largely of the Democrats, but also among some Republicans, that the rise of China was inevitable. And there just really wasn't a way to stop them. And yet, over the last number of years, we've seen their economy crater. We know, for example, their public statements on their economy probably privately not as good. They've chased wealth and there's been a wealth flight of the Chinese upper middle class. It seems like this pervasive thinking, though, in policy making in Washington, D.C. has just kind of been China's inevitable. Do you see that, number one, and number two, if you do, how do we get these policymakers out of that thinking?
Probably the most bipartisan thing in Congress today, if not the most bipartisan, is pushing back on China, because both parties are seeing the rise, the very quick rise, the aggression of Xi Jinping. There's no doubt that there's a leadership vacuum in the United States. Putin is seeing that and using the attack on Ukraine and other things that he's doing in supporting Syria and places in the Middle East. Xi Jinping is looking at this, how can he capture more economic prowess around the world? South America is overwhelmed by Chinese influence. If you go north of Peru and Chancay harbor there, $3.5 billion investment, shortest route between China and North America, South America is that route, $3.5 billion investment. The qualification was to Peru, you can't board us, you can't inspect us, you can't have cameras. So when you start seeing some of the things they're doing, coming from the Horn of Africa to the eastern side of South America to gain access to South America, I mean, China is all around us. We have our power projected via aircraft carrier, the numerous bases we have around our allies. So this is slowly creeping. I don't think it's going to evolve into an arms war, but certainly the technology side is huge, and China understands that. The Democrats understand that. Republicans understand that. I think where we're at right now is it's a race to see who collapses first. One of the things I mentioned, Senator Coburn, one of the things when I first went to Congress, I went to DC when I was 47 years old, as an engineer, as a person that's, conservative, fiscal conservative long before I went to Congress. I said, how do we pay for all this place? Washington, D.C. is it's a beautiful city, how do we pay for it? He said, remember this. He said, this is 12 years before I went to Congress. He said, remember this, every great civilization has failed because it couldn't maintain its infrastructure. And if you think about the Romans, you think about the British Empire, it got so vast that everything started collapsing when people wanted to gain independence. And I think that's what we have to be concerned about right now, is what happens when we all get so big. Is Japan waiting? Is Germany waiting? Are there other entities out there, countries that want to prevail to be the largest out there? And so we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be mindful of that. I'm the eternal optimist. I think that we have really smart people in Congress. The problem is, as I mentioned, the budget. We don't have a budget, so we're not focused on anything. Nancy Pelosi once said, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. Well, if you have no budget, you must have no values. And that's what you're kind of seeing right now. Everybody's just kind of running amok. And so we need to get back to a budget, both sides. We won't like the Democrats, they won't like ours, but at least we're having a conversation about focusing, getting back to regular order, doing our jobs as members of Congress. And I think I know America is the last best hope for freedom around the world. This experiment is being tested. This idea of a constitutional republic is being tested every single day today. It's exacerbated by the impacts and effects of social media, influencing people to be more aggravated and feeding you stuff that just really irritates you. I mean, I heard today an airline that might be based in Atlanta said we're no longer going to say ladies and gentlemen because that's racist. I just wanted to send a text to somebody. And I thought, no, they found me. They know that irritates me. So it works. It agitates us. It irritates us, and that further divides us. And we've got to get back as Americans and quit. We're in a circular firing squad right now, and it's problematic. And our founders warned us of this, that we can be our own, collapsing agent if we're not careful. And we've come on the precipice of that many times throughout our history, our young history. we need to start realizing that we need to all come together as Americans.
Congressman, you said something just a minute ago that I'm still mulling in my head because I've done this 11 times, and you were the first person I've ever talked to who said there are smart people in Congress.
They really are. They really are.
I mean, I know there are, and obviously Congress, we also, we can parody Congress and pick on some of the absurdities in Congress, but you sound way more positive at a bipartisan level than a lot of members of Congress that I talk to, that behind the scenes there is some willingness to recognize from both sides. We may not agree on how to solve the problem, but we recognize there's a problem.
When I went to Congress at the ripe old age of 58, I never in my wildest imagination thought that I would ever do anything political. I supported Republican causes, had Republican fundraisers for various people. Much like our governor, this you're going to talk to later today, he and I ran at the same time. In fact, in Tulsa, there were signs all over the city that said, "Just vote for Kevin," which was wonderful. We both won. Our offices were about a mile apart. We lived about 3 miles apart, both from the Tulsa area. But the reason, again, that we have the ability to change. We're the ones in Congress that are changing this. What I can tell you, which is really frustrating, is that I think we as voters have gotten lazy about not sending our best. From the first day I got there, I would go back home and business people, especially the 3,000 McDonald's franchisees, would say, what's it like? What's in Congress? I said, I've never seen so many people talk about things they know nothing about. And you have great staff. You can't, it's overwhelming. I mean, there's so many things. You can be talking about China in the first half of the hour, and then you're talking about abortion, then you're talking about tax policy, you're talking about border policy. No individual is going to have all of the knowledge, so you have to have great staff. But it's really easy to be really political. I mean, because as I said, social media will amplify that, and you will see money flow in return because voters think that's what's going to change Washington, D.C. What's going to change Washington, D.C. is great leadership, sitting down, rolling up our sleeves and saying, what's the most important thing in the world? And that's for America to win every single time. I'm a strong American first conservative, and I get criticized for that. But I say, if not America first, then who? I'm not American only. I think we need the economies around the world. I'm not like build fences around America, but I'm going to put Americans first every single time. Every single time. Because if we don't, that means that Syria is number one, or Russia is number one, or Ukraine is number one, or Peru is number one. I mean, we don't know. So then it's like not having a budget. If you don't have the focus of a budget by saying America's first, then you don't know if America's second, third, or whatever. And I think we have to hone back in on that. We could say, conservative or Democrat or liberal, whatever, I'm an America first. But America has got to be first if we're going to fix this problem.
I want to go back to the Republican Study Committee. You mentioned the number. I've always been a big fan of the Republican Study Committee and so much of the intellectual firepower for the right that's come out of it. One of the criticisms that has come up often in the past is that members of Congress who are Republicans join it so they can say, how can you say I'm not a conservative? I'm a member of the Republican Study Committee. And now, of course, there is with the House Freedom Caucus. How can you say I'm not? I'm a member of the House Freedom Caucus. How do you balance that with members who want to join an organization because they think it gives them cover from criticism, but maybe actually aren't as committed to the values of the organization inside Congress?
I think it's an excellent question. I may be the first Republican Study Committee in modern time, or chair in modern times, to tell people they couldn't join. And I did that to 4 different members, great friends, great members of Congress in their respective areas of the country. And I said, I think our policies, as we go forward, I don't know your district very well, but I can tell you that the policies we're going to push forward, balanced budgets, issues on the border, issues on energy, are going to be detrimental to you winning certainly your general election, but maybe even your primary. In one particular case, and I'm not going to tell you who it is, but this person was the first person to ask me the first time I tried this messaging. And this individual said, this member of Congress said, you're going to be wrong. I'm going to show you, I'm going to be the most conservative person ever. And during the primary, his primary, the opponent said to him, they're standing and they're going after him, this person running against him said, yeah, I said that budget is conservative and it's going to do this, and this, and you know, this person is a member of the Republican Study Committee, He gets done, and the member of Congress says, I'm not a member of the Republican Study Committee. And that was the end of that. He won his primary by 17 points. And so I didn't know all this was going on, so the next day we met, and this individual, there's actually it's on C-SPAN, he comes up to me, just gives me a big bear hug right in the middle of the floor. I said, okay, what was that for? He goes, thank you for not letting me get on RSC. So, you know, sometimes, to your point, you can be your own worst enemy by joining some of these and put yourself in a bad spot. And we've had 3 others that we've done the same thing too. And they still might, you know, as their districts, they get a chance to get reelected and the voters say, okay, well, that wasn't a mistake, that person really needs to be here. And they go back and work their district to make it more conservative. And you can. I mean, there's some great examples, and again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but there's some examples where Republicans win a district, this is recently, win a district, say 52-48, and go to Congress and you know, and become very conservative in their messaging and how they vote, and go back and have meetings every weekend when they're home, their recesses, going back and talking to their individual voters, and the next election win at 60-40, the same group, because they're taking the time to go back to work their district and not being lazy about it. Listen, you're gonna have Congressman Chip Roy on. I mean, he's had a tough district in Texas, and he is as passionate and with as much conservative fervor than anybody in Congress, and he's in a tough district, but he goes back and works his district, goes back and talks to the people in his district, say, this is why I'm the way I am. I think America matters. I want to fight every single day for conservative principles, because if I don't, the Socialist Democrats will take it over. And if we look at what happened, you know, with the pick that Kamala Harris just had going with Tim Walz from Minnesota, that's the most liberal ticket that we've ever seen in presidential politics in American history. She's not trying to go to the middle to be more moderate. She's taking it farther left. And so that tells you right now that they're trying to turn out their vote for the progressive social democrats and thinking that they can drag along some Republicans to put them over the hump. And heaven help us all if that happens.
First of all, I want to thank you for staying a little longer with Congresswoman Kammick and her flight getting canceled and hanging out with me here, because it's great to meet you. I want to ask you here at the end about the future with just a narrow majority. The speaker had wanted to come, and with the storm and the fundraising that he's doing, couldn't make it work. I know he's out working hard with fundraising. How do you see the landscape shaking up for House elections this year?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, obviously, you know, last year was pretty chaotic. Started the year chaotic. You know, it's kind of the middle of the speaker race the first week last year, and then certainly in the fall. There will be multiple books to be written about last year, about the politics behind the politics behind the politics. It is a very political environment all the time. As we go forward, we're going to have to discern what we think is the main thing. Is it going to be business as usual? You mentioned CRs. We're going to be dealing with that. Actually, we're dealing with it right now. I'm in the process of writing memos, laying out sort of the case for. We're not going to hit our funding deadlines. We're not even going to hit them in the House, for that matter. Just to give everybody kind of how this is supposed to look. The president, by law, is supposed to have his or her budget out by the first week of February. And pretty much they may have missed it by a month. And the reason I say, I'm kind of being flippant about it, it really doesn't matter. That Democrats, Republicans in the House, that's the aspiration of where the president wants to go of either party. The real matter is what the Congress that's in charge does. And they're supposed to have a budget out, you know, by the first part of April. And then the appropriators start. They're supposed to have it done by, say, roughly June. And then it goes to the Senate. The Senate, they're doing theirs at the same time, and we come together in a conference in, you know, like July. And then we come back in September, kind of finish it up, and we fund the government by September 30th. So then what happens is, it'd be like, you say, we're going to get to our budget in the city or your own household, and I don't want to do it. Let's just do what we did last year. Well, that's fine, except if you bought a Singer sewing machine last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and for 20 years you bought a Singer sewing machine. You don't need the Singer sewing machines anymore. And that's what's happening in our military. We need to have real robust appropriations done so that we're modernizing our military. modernizing our nuclear arsenal, so that we're protecting this nation, which is a fundamental responsibility of Congress and the White House, that we're securing the sovereignty of this great nation. And we're not doing that. We just keep kicking the can down the road, and that's no way to run a country. And so we need to resolve ourselves that we're going to back up, we're going to work together, and we're going to do that. But I mean, it's the most frustrating place for a person of business background, because when you look at it, it's really not that hard. It's all the politics. The policy is really pretty easy. It's the politics, everybody wanting to win the next election. So what will happen here is we're going to have an election November 5th, and if we get the trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the White House, there will be what's known as reconciliation, which is a budget maneuver that's controlled by the Senate, because otherwise you need 60 votes in the Senate. Reconciliation does it by simple majority. So then what will happen is we'll start, and every committee is working on like border policy, energy policy, economic policy, foreign policy, how we're going to fund all this. And we'll spend the first 100 days working heavily on that. And you really have 1 year, because the following year is the year that we go through a re-election again in the House. And nobody will, for the most part, will have the intestinal fortitude to make hard votes. So we just need to get, bless you.
Thanks.
So we've got a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And I'm up to it. I'll work day and night, 7 days a week. I'm one that says we shouldn't go home, we get it done. The American people deserve it. That's the only way we're going to change it. We need to roll up our sleeves, get together, and make it happen.
So my last question for you, I'm now live middays in Tulsa on KRMG. I've got to get out there. If I go to Tulsa, where do I need to go?
Well, anywhere in Tulsa is going to be great. Great Americans in Tulsa, by the way. That's what yeah, great Americans. You got to go to, you got to go to the parks there. We have the Gathering Place, which is the second largest city park in the nation behind Central Park. Just won the national the park of the year, actually a couple years now for the United States. The wealthy Democrat billionaire whose parents were oil and gas people, they're from Israel, funded it $500 million to convert a lot of land on the river. It's beautiful. And you got to go to Mahogany Steakhouse. It's your big steak while you're there.
I will do that.
It's great. You're more than welcome to stay at our house when you come.
There you go. And I'll definitely go to a local McDonald's while they're only for the fries.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. And the ice cream machine will be working, because I'll call ahead.
Thank you so much for hanging out. It's been great. Thank you. We're going to take about 10, 15 minutes here. Sam Brown's going to join me on stage. You're not going to want to miss this. This is a seat we absolutely can win in Nevada, and he's probably the most compelling Senate candidate anywhere in the country who's running this year. And then Senator McConnell. I will tell you this, Kat Kamek is such a trooper. I got a text message from her saying, I know I missed my slot and I know my flight was canceled, but I'm still coming to hang out. So she's still coming. So God bless her for doing that. But we will take a quick time out here, and I will be back.